Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tessian's virtual summit, Forward Thinking, Preparing for the Next Wave of Email Attacks. I'm Emily Nolan, Account Executive at Tessian, and I'm super excited to be your host today. On behalf of everyone at Tessian, thank you all for tuning in. We started this event with one goal in mind, to bring CISOs, Infosec leaders, and cybersecurity trailblazers together to discuss and share the very latest insights and strategic playbooks in email security. So, while you can just sit back, relax, and enjoy the sessions, we want to hear from you. There's ways you can get involved as well. For those of you joining via LinkedIn Live, there's a link in the chat to the description below. If you're sharing your top takeaways on LinkedIn or Twitter, please remember to include the hashtag FWDthinking so that we can join your conversation as well. And if you experience any technical difficulties or want to get in touch with Tessian, you can contact us at hello@tessian.com. So without further ado, let's begin. Our first session is titled Beyond the Gateway, Investigating Threats that Outsmart SEGs. I'm happy to hand it over to Ashley Bull, a senior sales engineer at Tessian, and she's sitting down with Jules Corbin, senior information security manager at B. Riley Financial. I know they have some great examples to share with you on how behavioral intelligence can uncover emergent inbound threats. If you're ready, let's dive in.
I'm really excited about the topic of our session today. I'm having a lot of daily conversations with customers about the evolving threat landscape, and we're seeing more and more attacks bypass legacy email security solutions like a secure email gateway. And we'll dig into this a bit more with Jules right now. So with that, let's jump right in. Jules, thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely.
Jules, can you start off by telling us a bit about B. Riley and your role in the security team over there?
Yeah, absolutely. So B. Riley Financial is a very multifaceted company. We kind of do everything that is involved with money, everything from litigation to trading to private wealth management. And we've been expanding rapidly over the last few years. I actually do have a legacy relationship with the firm from about 10 years ago, but I rejoined in 2019 to start the security department with our CISO, Aaron Goodwin. And I have to say, I've been kind of fascinated with the different problems that, kind of arise and that we've had to solve. And it definitely keeps work very interesting.
Thanks for that. And can you expand a little bit on what types of things you're specifically dealing with in your role on a day-to-day basis and what things keep you up at night from a security perspective?
Sure. So, I'm the senior manager in the department. I'm focused on operations and program management and just, I'm really focused on, trust and verify that model of making sure that, our controls are working and that we have the appropriate layers in place. But, despite all of these layers and all these things that we're doing and best practices we're following and frameworks we're working with, I think the thing that really keeps me up at night is phishing. uh, you know, if they hit 50% of our user base and one person clicks on that, um, it can create a nightmare scenario. So I'd say phishing is still our number one threat, despite all the administrative and technical controls you put in place. It really sometimes does come down to human behavior. So we have started to do more with less time, be on our mobile phones. Uh, you know, we want to go faster and faster and faster. And when it comes to email, things are getting, a lot less obvious when it comes to phishing. We used to train people a long time ago to look for blatant misspellings, and you'll know it's not so obvious these days. It's really not. And I think the time crunch that we're all under can kind of lead to disaster. Um, People need more help. It's not anything they're doing wrong. The attacks are just getting that much better.
Yeah, you touched on a few very interesting points there. I think you know, first off, it only takes one. And I think that's a great mindset to have of being more proactive versus reactive and understanding that, you know, even if just that one person receives that one phishing email, and to your other point, someone's moving quickly, right? In a lot of roles, we're just moving through our day to day. People, go through their annual security awareness training. Definitely want to talk a little bit more about that later. But in that exact moment when they're opening up an email, a user is unlikely to be investigating and looking so deeply at every single component there. So that definitely makes a lot of sense, and it's common with what we hear with a lot of our other customers. So just transitioning a little bit specifically into the phishing side of things and what you're using today from an email security perspective. Do you have a SEG in place today?
We do. We have a SEG in place, and I was talking with our infrastructure team. Catches about 63% of our malicious emails and spams. So it's more than 50%. So I'd say that's a majority, but it's not something that's going to help you sleep better at night. So that's where we kind of saw that gap and it needed a little something more.
Got it. And I guess expanding on that a little bit more as well, what sparked the search? And you kind of addressed a bit of that with the percentage there, but what specifically sparked the search for an additional layer of security? And in your opinion, why is a SEG not enough alone?
Well, I focus on a few reasons. The number one I think is probably spoofing. These first time email addresses that are coming through. We haven't had anything in the past that will really kind of bring that up in a user space, right? And just say like, hey, you haven't seen this before, or hey, something looks a little off, and you're usually communicating with this email address and not this one. That's incredibly valuable. I think another thing is 0 days. A lot of standard email security products are focused on yesterday's attacks. And we were talking about earlier, as attacks are getting more and more advanced, you need something that's a step ahead. And another reason I'd say is insider threat, actually. I think a lot of us don't realize, we love our people. We want to trust every single person that we work with. But from a risk management perspective, we would be remiss to not think about where is all of our data going. And you kind of need to move past DLP, because DLP can look for certain things. You can look for social security numbers, you can look for bank account numbers, you can look for stuff like that and stop that, encrypt that, whatever you need to do from a control perspective to make sure that data is protected. But what about proprietary information? What about information that may not have some of that sensitive data, but is very valuable to the company? Do you know where that's going? Do you know that people are maybe emailing themselves some valuable company information? That's something that we're leveraging Tessian for.
Awesome. And that was super insightful. And to dig in a little bit further as well, are you able to share an example of maybe a specific attack or certain types of attacks that you were seeing bypass the SEG? You mentioned a little bit earlier around impersonation, but could you expand on that a bit?
Sure, absolutely. So, we had an attack in one of the division of our businesses a while ago where there was a malicious person that sat in between, got into a mailbox, sat there, looked at the correspondence, copied and pasted the whole thing, and then came in from a different email address that looked extremely similar to the person that they had been corresponding with on the inside. And it's something that even we all had to kind of zoom in a little bit. An R and an N very much look like an M in an email address. And I think it's very unfortunate to see the way that kind of unfolded. And we realized that we needed more protection.
That makes sense. And that's, again, very common in a lot of conversations I'm having today with those types of attacks in particular, bypassing current layers of email security, where there is that one letter difference. And I've heard the same, and I've seen the same myself. Even knowing that something is an attack, you do have to zoom in and figure out, okay, what is different about this email address? And these are exactly the types of attacks that Tessian is focused on helping detect and prevent, or at least giving your users some sort of context around why we think this is potentially suspicious. Because a lot of the attacks today that we're seeing get through maybe do have one letter off, but because the attacker owns the domain, right, they are configuring things like SPF, DKIM, DMARC correctly, so email authentication checks pass. Maybe there's no malicious URL or attachment. Attackers know that if they've included some sort of malicious content, SEG, Microsoft likely going to pick up on it, and it's probably not going to get to the user at that point. So that's why we're seeing more of that shift to social engineering, where it's, maybe there's not actually any quote unquote malicious content within the email, but the intent is, asking to change banking details or wire instructions. So definitely in line with what we've seen with our customers and just in the threat landscape in general. So appreciate that insight there. So shifting slightly from the attacks themselves to just general awareness within the organization, what is the security culture like at B. Riley, and how are you and your team educating employees to lower risk?
Sure. So something I'm very thankful for, B. Riley has a very strong focus on this that is, something that is backed by all of our executives. So, when your executives are taking it this seriously and you're using the top-down approach, it really creates a culture of security awareness. And that's something that I know a lot of companies have to battle with. And so I'm very thankful that we have that here. We're doing phishing training, we're doing annual training. Um, but I think the training that comes in through Tessian has kind of been one of our most valuable pieces. Um, it's been a great addition to our education program because most importantly, it's real time. One of the things that I think is probably a little bit of a bottleneck in most people's companies is, they'll forward, is this okay? Is this okay for me to interact with? Can you check this out for me? Tessian's right there. It's right there in Outlook for them to know without having to rely on a person or someone in the security department to validate that email. Tessian's got that warning right there for them. So I just feel like our colleagues are better protected, and honestly, it gives them the convenience that the business needs and deserves, right? If we have a bottleneck in security where all of a sudden people need to funnel every suspicious email every single time, that's not really great for business. That affects availability. So having testing in place is one of those things that just gives answers now, just like people prefer it.
Yeah, and you touch on a few interesting things there with just the end user experience that Tessian provides. How is that? Sounds like from a user perspective, it's a positive experience. What was that shift like from maybe pre-Tessian to having those banners and making sure that they were aware of what to expect? What was that adoption like? Was it fairly seamless? Was there some effort needed from your team to kind of educate them on what to expect and kind of how to use the tool?
It was actually pretty great. Like I said, we had that top-down approach from management. And we have a great marketing team as well. So when we have a new product like this that we are rolling out to the company, we actually work with our marketing team to make sure people are educated. And it's pretty easy because Tessian is pretty self-explanatory. In the little banner at the top of your emails. And I think a lot of people are also used to the external flag, seeing things like that. That was a great addition, obviously, but you know, you need more than that sometimes. So it was nice to see that people were welcoming the product. As we bring on merger and acquisition companies, we go through a little bit of a training on it, but I think most people are really thankful to have a tool there that's giving them that guidance and assurance.
Awesome. And we've been talking about this theme throughout around how Tessian is integrated into your security stack today as a customer of ours. And we just talked a bit about more of the end user experience and how
Mhm.
that's been recognized and adopted internally. Could you tell us more maybe on the admin side too, how you're working with Tessian and how others on your team are working with the tool to mitigate social engineering attacks.
I have a great example. One of the features that we've been using lately, it's relatively new to the platform, is the ability to remove emails from everyone's inboxes. I haven't seen a tool like that in the past. We have a very valuable member of our infrastructure team that just very smart, was able to run a script and remove it from inboxes. But that takes time to log in, run a script. There's a delay in getting it back. With Tessian, we're logging into Tessian, we're identifying the problem email, we're clicking remove from inboxes, and it's done. And so from an administrative perspective, we're talking about, I'd have to talk to my guru, but a fraction of the time in response. And I think, as we all know, as security professionals, seconds really count, especially when you have an email attack, because it's not just as necessarily a bad payload that's going to be a problem, but what if they compromise someone's inbox and they just continue to spread it to clients, or it just
Right.
is this endless cycle of just continuing to spread. So the response time that it has given us has been incredibly valuable.
Right. And yeah, like you said, it really seconds matter because of forwarding, because of replying to an email, like you said, spreading it to others even outside the organization. So definitely makes a lot of sense, and really glad to hear that you're seeing a lot of value out of that investigate and respond feature. And I know we've been talking primarily around the inbound side, and you alluded to insider threat earlier. What pieces there out of the Tessian platform are you seeing the most value out of from the DLP side of things? And where were you from a posture perspective before Tessian?
I felt secure when it came to sensitive data, to making sure that that's not leaving the company in an unprotected manner. We are leveraging Microsoft DLP for that. It is a good product. But I was mentioning earlier, I think the real problem is intellectual property. These valuable things that this company has been growing and working on, um, that carries a lot of weight in our industry, to have these, sometimes what will, can be considered industry secrets. So, um, you know, if people leave the firm, or just for any other reason decide that they would like to take some of our material, that's obviously something that is against our policy. So we didn't really have a great way to be alerted to that activity if it wasn't sensitive information. So to us, that was just a gap that we weren't really willing to, sit there and watch. We needed something in there that's protecting us and reminding people of, what policy is when it comes to sharing information that's outside of our company or to a personal email address.
Right. Appreciate that. That's
Mhm.
super helpful to know. And again, glad that you're seeing that piece on the DLP side from Tessian, and that it's helped you from that perspective. So just to, I guess, close things out here a bit, what what advice do you have for other security professionals and teams who are, one, watching this, but also are in a similar spot to where B. Riley was, um, in terms of navigating their email security journey? I know that's more of a broad question, but just any advice you have for our viewers here today.
Sure. I think the thing that really comes to mind are layers. They're great in a cake, and they're great on your security framework. We need layers. We rely on layers for a very good reason. So it's one of those things that you often don't realize until it's too late. A SEG is a great part of your infrastructure, but it shouldn't be the only part. With today's threats, how advanced they are, the spoofing, your user base really does deserve more help than humans can provide. So people want answers in real time. We're all stressed. We all want to do more and more and more and get things done faster. And a rush is a risk. So Layers are very pivotal. That would be my number one recommendation to really sleep better at night as a security professional.
Amazing. We love layers on cake, and I think you made a great point. Layers are very critical to security as well. No one tool is going to be able to handle it all. So Jules, thank you so much. This has been such a great discussion. I know I've learned a ton from this, and I know our audience has too. Very insightful to hear about how B. Riley navigated their email security journey, beyond the SEG. And that's it from us. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ashley and Jules, for kicking off Forward Thinking with this super important topic. If you're joining via LinkedIn Live, let us know what you thought of the session in the comments. Now, we will move on to our next session, where we will examine the different layers of email security, including Microsoft's native capabilities. Our next speakers will tackle a hot question. When it comes to email security, is Microsoft good enough? Our speakers include Bob Boyle, who is a product manager at Tessian, and Jason Patterson, the Infosec Senior Director at Nasuni. Let's get into it.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for Forward Thinking. And of course, hello, Jason. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you, Bob?
I'm doing good. I'm very excited. This is the big one, right? This is the question I know our entire audience is on pins and needles waiting to hear the answer to. Is Microsoft good enough? But let's not get ahead of ourselves, right? Don't worry, we're going to break down all of the information here today, but I thought we should set the stage first. Sound good to you?
That sounds great.
Perfect. Awesome. All right. So earlier this year, Microsoft published their 4th edition to the Threat Intelligence Cyber Signals Report, noting that nearly all forms of business email compromise attacks are on the rise. In fact, from April 2022 to April 2023, they detected and investigated a total of 35 million BEC attempts. That's over 150,000 a day. And I know from our past discussions, Jason, that you and the Nasuni team have experienced this rise of BEC firsthand and have done a fantastic job of combating these social engineering-based attacks, which is exactly why we thought our audience would benefit from hearing your story. And yes, answer that question, is Microsoft good enough? So let's go ahead, start at the beginning. I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about security and specifically email security at Nasuni prior to bringing Tessian on board.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Like everybody else, we, are using Microsoft Security as its out-of-the-box configuration. And it was not without its challenges, right? So we would see a lot of phishing emails, a lot of phishing, very good, well-crafted emails. Lots of times it would be a link to OneDrive, right? Where a user would say, hey, here's a new bonus report, something that was really enticing for end users to want to click on. I'd have a link to a phishing website where it'd capture their credentials. Kind of the challenges we faced there is, first off, information security and IT wouldn't even know that it was happening until a user were to click on something, or possibly we were involved in the attack. But then once we found it, the remediation steps were just so long to try to pull that out of a user's email box. If anybody's ever had to run a system to pull an email out of everybody's email box, and it takes a huge PowerShell script and hours to run. We were doing these, 5 times a day sometimes. We get so many attacks in these, their emails, we want to get rid of them. And it was just a real pain, and the visibility into what was happening just wasn't there. You were really relying on end users to report it to us. It wasn't as easy as, oh, this is happening and we could go back and catch it, right? It was a very reactive approach instead of a proactive approach. And that's why we looked and saw that we needed something different, because it just wasn't cutting it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great recap, Jason. Appreciate that. I want to drill into a few of the things that you talked about there, starting with those types of attacks that you were seeing, right? You talked a little bit about bonuses, and I know we've talked about these attacks before, but what about those types of attacks were so difficult for your end users and were so successful and effective at actually targeting your end users? What made those attacks so challenging?
Well, I think the end users want to do good inherently. And so the most successful ones we would see would be something that involves them financially, right? A bonus payment. And they're expecting to see something in the December timeframe about a yearly bonus. But we also saw a lot of attacks based on you need to approve an invoice. Even though an end user never approved the invoice before, they wanted to do good in their company. And so they would click on it and say, well, maybe I'm supposed to do this. So the threat actors were really playing into the inherent nature of employees wanting to do their job and get stuff done timely. It's always that sense of urgency that trips people up. It's, oh, you got to do it now. Action's required. If you don't do it, your account's going to be deleted. Like those things help people along to think, oh, I got to do this. And so they don't think about, is this really what I'm supposed to do? I've never done this before. Maybe now I do it, right? They don't think about it. And that's where they just, oh, yep, I click it. Oh, I got to put in my credentials and there we go. And now they've been compromised.
Yeah. It's really playing on that human nature. Like you said, people want to do a good job at their work, right? So finding ways to take advantage of that is how we've seen these BEC attacks become so successful. And it is difficult for them to spot. But before we get too far into it, I know you mentioned that you were seeing, sometimes even 5 of these types of attacks per day, and that investigation and remediation process seemed pretty painful for you and the Nasuni team. I'd love it if you could talk a little bit about what that process looked like, start to finish, and how much time that was taking away from your team.
Yeah, so if we go back to the bonus one, because that was a big attack that we saw. A lot of our salespeople got it, and then other internal people. So we got the attack notification probably at 9 o'clock in the morning was when it started to be reported. People were like, "Hey, I clicked on this," and so we started to investigate. The team opened a ticket, and we found that it had went to probably half of the company had received this email, and we decided, okay, the best course of action is to get people who are affected to change their email address or their email passwords. But also we wanted to pull it out of all the email boxes. And that's the challenge, right? Because once you get the message ID, it's not as simple as remove from mailbox. There's no easy button inside Microsoft 365 to do that. You have to write a PowerShell script. And most of my team are not super great at writing PowerShell. So it took a little bit of time to do that. And I think that we spent a good part of the day just developing the remediation to pull it. And then it had to run. And it wasn't like, boom, they were gone. It ran for, I think it was probably 6 hours it took to fully run the script through everybody's email. During that time, we were still at risk of people clicking on it, right? So that the attack hadn't stopped, even though we were in the process. And so every time this type of attack happened, we'd follow the same playbook. And we would have an exposure time of 4 to 6 hours where those emails were still able to be clicked on. And we'd send out communications through Slack and say, hey, this is a known thing, don't click on it. But people still clicked on it, right? So the attack still lived for that time.
Yeah, absolutely. So the longer it's in the inbox, obviously, the more at risk the organization becomes. So the quicker we can get those out, the better. I've got to say, as a former seller myself, if I see an email that says bonus, I understand the urge to want to click on that. So they are those tricky types of attacks. But to your point, right? The PowerShell remediation, leave that in the inbox does expose the organization to risk. So I guess in your opinion, Jason, the question that we're all here to answer, prior to joining Tessian, was Microsoft really good enough for you and the Nasuni team?
Well, at the time, we thought it was because that's all we had, right? But once we saw the capabilities of Tessian, we realized that they're really better together, right? Microsoft does some stuff really well in catching emails, but I can tell you that even with everything set up in Microsoft, we still see a large number of emails not being caught by the Microsoft system that then Tessian is flagging. So Microsoft alone is not good enough.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And if we actually look back at that 2023 Microsoft Threat Intelligence Cyber Signal report that we were discussing earlier, Microsoft themselves even recommends that organizations leverage AI-based phishing detection to enhance existing security and training for employees to better spot BEC attacks in real time. So I want to talk about each of these recommendations, starting with AI-based phishing detection to enhance that existing M365 security that you and the Nasuni team had been leveraging. So in your case at Nasuni, was there a specific moment when you decided to look for another layer? Was it that bonus season type of attack, or what really prompted you to go out there and search for something like Tessian?
Well, it was when we realized that protecting our end users just wasn't adequate enough, right? Because we kept seeing attacks, we kept seeing, people falling for it, and we really considered, how do we do a better job, right? Because the threat vector here is only going to keep getting better, and even with ongoing adaptations of, Chat GPT, phishing emails are getting better. It was no longer just looking for misspelled words to see if something was bad, right? We needed something more, and that led the team to go out in the market and say, what else is out there? And that's when we found Tessian, and found that the way that you were protecting email, through AI and whatnot, was just a game changer.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned a little bit of this, Jason, in a couple of seconds ago here, in how you see Microsoft and Tessian pairing together, right? You are still seeing threats that are being flagged by Tessian that Microsoft may not have picked up on. I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you and the team are pairing Tessian and M365 together and what that process looks like today.
Yeah, definitely. So we have a lot of rules set up in Microsoft to protect the initial sweep. And then once the email goes through Tessian, we have more rules there. But the tool actually does a lot of things without us having to really modify it. You guys are doing a really good job at getting ahead of what's the new threats that are happening. Lately we've been seeing this threat with these Google groups where they're sending in, it presents itself as an invoice for McAfee or Geek Squad or something like that. Those are just keep getting through Microsoft. They have not stopped that. But after reporting it a few times through Tessian, your machine learning algorithm said, hey, this actually is bad. So when it delivers to the mailbox, it has a big red box around it that says, we think this is phishing. Do you want to keep it or do you want to delete it? So the ease of use is there as well. It's not just stuck in a quarantine box that we're going to review at the end of the day. We're seeing it right away, and we can make the decision, oh, this actually is something I need, or no, it's actually bad, and it deletes it. And then if we see enough of these going out, we're able to go into the Tessian portal and remove them really easily. So it's a huge game changer for closing that attack vector easily. And it's not much work for our teams now because our end users are interacting with the system and training it what is bad and what is good, which is helping everybody out.
Absolutely. And you touched a little bit on that end user interaction. We'll get to that in a moment, but I want to drill a little bit into the remediation and the ease of removal, right? Because we talked about with Microsoft leveraging those 6-hour PowerShell scripts. We talked about the investigation period with M365 that you and the team were going through. How has that changed with Tessian? What does that new process look like? And how much time is it taking your team when an attack is alerted on?
Oh, yes, it's huge. The game changed completely with Tessian. So if we identify, say, that same type of bonus email, say it got all the way through and passed Tessian's security model, right? The remediation is easy. We go into the console. We can just take the subject line from the email, paste it into the console, and hit search, and it will show us where it's all at, who's all received it, and we click the box and hit remove from inbox, report it. And it does two things. It goes through and within seconds, it is gone from the user's inbox. And then it reports it to Tessian to help your algorithms train to look for it. So it's taken that 6-hour process down to just minutes. When we see a threat, we can have it deleted within minutes and it's gone. That's huge. It totally eliminates the ability for our users then to click on it so that the threat is eliminated.
Yeah, that risk exposure that we talked about earlier with those threats still sitting in the inbox. You're not going on Slack and on email sending out those notifications to people saying, hey, we know about this. Please, we're deleting it right now. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's just gone. Yeah, we don't have to say, please don't do it while we work to get rid of it. It's just no longer exists. The threat is closed. So that has been a huge savings for my team. And it's probably saved me from having to hire an additional person to do this. in our reality, because it's just that easy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So now let's shift a little bit forward to that second recommendation, which you touched on slightly, that Microsoft made in their cyber signals report, training employees to better spot BEC attacks in real time. And I think it's important that they noted that real-time training. I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about the security awareness training philosophy at Nasuni and your end users' relationship with the in-the-moment training that Tessian is providing.
Yeah, so like a lot of companies, we do a monthly security awareness training. We'll pick one of the hot things that's happening in the industry, type of business email compromise. But that's obviously not good enough. Once a month, to say, oh, be on the lookout for. So when it comes to bonus season, right, we always play in November, December, we're going to do the one for bonuses because that's what we're going to expect to see. But also the stuff that Tessian does natively is bringing it up and is saying, hey, this looks suspicious. You should check this out before you open it. So the users are starting to see, okay, now I see what type of things are bad. And they're seeing right there on the screen that Tessian's saying, this is probably not legitimate. You shouldn't click on it. So it's really augmenting that monthly training we're getting with that real time, what to look for type of training. And so now end users, the success rate for phishing attacks has dropped a lot. We do internal phishing campaigns against our people, and we're seeing the success rate drop. And I think it's a real testament to what Tessian is doing. Now, those emails aren't getting alerted with the red box. We let them through, but even people are starting to realize the things that we're asking for in our phishing campaigns are things that are threats that they've seen Tessian block already.
Absolutely. And that's the goal, right? When you send one of those phishing tests out, having a user reach out and say, hey, Tessian should have put a box on this. Now, obviously, it's a phishing simulation, so we want to let them get tested. But training those end users, changing their behavior, turning them into an extension of your security team, and helping everyone protect the business a little bit stronger.
Yeah, and when and we give a lot of compliments to people when they report it, because obviously it gets through and they're like, this is phishing. If they send it to our phishing internal email address, we're like, hey, thank you for seeing something and saying something. Like, that's the reward that we see. They're actually learning what to look for and what not to click on. So yeah, it's been a real game changer for our internal security.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic to hear. Absolutely. Okay, awesome. Well, Jason, hey, one of the last two questions that I like to wrap up with are, what are some of the emerging threats that you're seeing more of today? And then the second is, what are some of the emerging threats that you're expecting to see more of in the future as we head into the end of 2023 and into 2024?
Yeah, I think some of the emerging threats, you really just touched on it with this new Google group thing. Because it's difficult for us to block it because it's a legitimate Google group. So the domain is real. You can't just go in and block the domain. So that's something we've really seen. And I've been getting a lot of them personally. And so we're seeing a lot of that. And I think the threat actors are going to continue with that trend of using legitimate services, that you can't just do a whole domain block. It's not the traditional, this domain is 5 days old, so that the traditional ways of blocking it no longer exist, right? They're using existing services. I expect that to happen. And I don't know, I think the forward-looking stuff is really going to be better quality. I think that is something we're seeing, like I touched on before. We used to know if an email had poor grammar, chances are it was phishing. But with the advancements of AI tools and cleaning that up, we're seeing much more sophisticated emails come in. But I think it's going to be more on, touching on getting stuff done quickly. It's going to be continuing that, but it's going to be more legitimate looking sources to help fool the Tessians of the world and Microsoft to get through the layers.
Absolutely. Well, hey, that's why we keep training end users to help us spot those attacks as well. And hopefully we can continue to turn our end users as extensions of the security team, the way that you and your team have as well. So Perfect. That's awesome. Well, Jason, I think it's looking like it's coming about time for us. So thanks again for sharing your journey with Tessian with us today, and for helping us answer the question: is Microsoft good enough? For those of you at home, thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the next session.
Thank you so much, Bob and Jason. Super insightful for our audience. Now, if you've ever tried to make a business case for upgrading your security stack, the next session's for you. What is the ROI of complete cloud email security? Who are the stakeholders involved? Our guest speakers are ready to share their tips with you. In the next session, we have Tessian CISO, Josh Yavor, joined by David Bennett, Director of IT at Birkett Long LLP, and Marcus Bailey, Head of Cloud Technology Solutions at Prosperity 24/7. Over to you guys.
Hey everyone, and welcome to this session on ROI of email security and making the business case. I'm Josh, and I'm joined here by Marcus and David, and we're going to spend the next 20 minutes or so talking about what ROI means to us in our organizations, how we approach it, how we articulate it, and even measure it, perhaps, if we have time, and looking forward to where we go with this conversation. So let's get started. So welcome, Marcus and David. I think probably the best place to start is ROI. We know it breaks down to return on investment, but that can mean a lot of different things, different organizations, and in different contexts. So maybe, David, starting with you, what does that mean to you in terms of return on investment when we're thinking about email security?
From my point of view, it's very simply how quickly we can recover the cost of the initial product. From a professional services point of view, that includes things like reputational damage. Should there be a problem or a breach, your impact on the brand, and also the typical cost that you would incur through insurance premiums. So I think last year our insurance premiums went up by 50%. This year they're going up by a further 15%. So these things can contribute to how we can make a business case for ROI.
Got it. And I think that cybersecurity insurance premium experience is something that probably resonates with a lot of folks in the audience. I know it's top of mind for us as well. So Marcus, on your end, what's your take on ROI, especially given the context of your role?
Yeah, so as a provider, ROI is an interesting one because I have to kind of bring that to the table when I'm offering solutions to clients. So it's always like, what does this solution provide? And what does it mean? What are you getting for your money? So I have to be very clear in the ROI. I think it's very hard to measure, and I think it's possibly impossible. Sometimes I see the stats that people put around, and it's really hard, especially to scale to, they're obviously on larger size organizations, but I have to be very clear on what the product delivers, what they're paying, and what they're going to get for their money. So to me, ROI is what the product gives them straight away off the bat.
So it's a blend of coverage based off of the investment, feature and functionality map ups. What does it get you relative to what you're paying? I think is what I'm hearing from you, Marcus, and then David on your end. It's also about the financial implications of efficiencies, and then also cost management in terms of risk, right? So things like what is that business impact if there was a breach event, and how do we think about that in terms of value and similarly. Absolutely. So I think
so it is a breach. It is a combination of tangible and intangible events, though, isn't it? So Marcus is talking about how easy it is to justify it on the purchase or the solution, whereas there's also a load of intangibles, which is the impact of what would happen to a firm if it was breached, and the branding and the other assurances piece. So when you're doing a business case, you just have to think of all three or two.
Absolutely. And in those like tangible and intangibles, that's so right. And it varies based off of the audiences and stakeholders you're trying to engage with in that ROI conversation and convince people of the perceived, ROI and actual ROI. How do you approach that for each of you in terms of trying to articulate, the right aspects of ROI in a business context around email security?
So for me, we're obviously, when we talk about security, we're talking about protecting the organization from threats that people are worried about. So we ask the client what they're worried about. It's obviously most people are worried about the same sort of thing. So we're looking at what does the email security product do? What threats does it protect you from? And then we obviously talk about the features that the immediate threats the immediate requirements that it can fulfill. And then on top of that, what the product, you know, we can embellish the product with the extra features and the bells and whistles and the sort of nice to haves that people get. So we put that all together and then we sort of deliver that as the product, and that's how we approach it with our clients.
And when you're working with your clients, are there, I mean, you mentioned that's pretty predictable, right, in terms of, you know, key areas of value. What's your experience in terms of, you know, what are the common patterns around what's top of mind for your customers when they're looking at email security solutions for ROI? And I would love to also hear about like and any takeaways in terms of that sales process that you're seeing with your clients around how they're actually approaching contextualizing ROI in their organization?
So first and foremost, the product's got to work. So it has to work. It has to deliver what they want. You know, it's got to do what they want. And then when we're talking about ROI, I think we're also talking about the management overhead. So how easy is it to implement? How does it interact with other products? I'm head of cloud, so I'm very cloud orientated. So normally 365 or so how easy can we implement it? How much management overhead have we got? How long does it take to work every week? So with Tessian, it's a lot AI based, and so it is very low, sort of has a low management overhead. And then we also talk about how much impact of productivity, because with security, I think there's a scales of productivity and security, and it's getting that right is really important to everyone. So that's how we sort of weigh up the ROI, that sort of side as well.
Got it. And David, what are your thoughts? Does that resonate in terms of your experience and how you approach?
Yeah, essentially we would break it into potentially three areas. So it would be the impact it has on our end users in the office by putting in products like Tessian. What would be the effect on them? How much will there be issues that cause them go slower or faster or whatever? We also look at the benefits to the client, and we would have a look at the impact it has on the business as a whole, like will it reduce risk? And in so which areas are they? So, you know, we would imagine that over a course of time you would get breached somewhere, and it's how that breach is minimized and the reaction to that. So anything we can do to support and reduce that risk and improve our ability to be protected has got to be seen as a good thing.
Absolutely. And maybe let's talk about like actual measurables too, because I think we've talked at a high level about the different aspects and like categorical areas that feed into ROI, but it's a it's a challenging space, of course. You know, how do you measure, especially intangible things that are hypothetical likelihoods around like breach events and different types of potential impact there? But how do each of you approach actually identifying effective measurables when we're talking about contextualizing and presenting ROI in a business use case?
Well, from an intangible point of view, you can actually go and get information about how much a particular breach would cost or how much an insurance premium would go up as a result. So they are average costs that we can actually rip back into a proposal, and you can get that sort of information from your insurance companies. So that's not too difficult to do. In terms of reputational damage, that's quite a tough one. So it tends to be more of a working with the marketing department and anybody that they've actually gone and got assistance from to see what that would be realistic. But again, that's stuff that may happen. And so you have to quantify that as if we were only going to worry about the things that may happen, then virtually every project would probably be approved. So we have to put a rationale on essentially what is the gut feel for where you think you are and what the risk is to your particular project. Things like usability of the product, how many emails are going to be stored, how much safer you think you'll be as a result, I think are quite easy to obtain because basically companies like Tessian give you that information. And again, it's readily available.
Yeah, so from our point of view, we're also looking at the cost per user for the product, the like I said before, the overhead of the product. So how much time does it take to interact with it, manage it, you know, do things like release emails and stuff like that. And then we're obviously looking at compare that to the possibility of being attacked by a threat. So how much does a ransomware cost? How much does data leak cost? How much reputational damage does it cost? Which are hard to quantify. But that's how we sort of layer that in, sort of the two areas, quite simply like that.
But one
Got
of
it.
the
And Marcus,
I
go
was
ahead,
going
David.
to say, yeah, I was just going to say one of the advantages of it is these products are really easy and quick to install. So essentially, your return of investment starts as soon as you've put it in there. You can start understanding how your business is using email, and you can start understanding what threats you're seeing to each individual, who the targeted users are. So even if you need some quick returns, you can start to understand how email is being abused, and basically then tailor your responses very dynamically. So it's not like in the old days where you used to have to wait a year or 2 years. It's virtually instantaneous.
Absolutely. And I think like one of my favorite experiences in the last few years of being at Tessian and working with a lot of our prospects and customers is hearing some of those early aha moments where that perceived time to value in terms of ROI is on the order of hours to weeks because of what's discovered for the first time or prevented for the first time and similar. Marcus, I wanted to go back to you really quickly around any types of like frameworks or repeatable approaches that you use when we're thinking about that the cost and ROI potentially tied to management overhead. I've seen this done well. I've seen this done inconsistently, though. Would love to just hear like how you see like where do you get traction and with working with clients in terms of figuring out how to actually measure that overhead and administrative costs that comes with technology products like this.
Yep. So well, obviously, first conversation comes from someone who's not actually going to be hands-on. So we sell the product to a CTO or something like that, and then we get on the ground with the guys in the team, and we do structure some, how we do structure the key deliverables, and we to be honest with you, we don't sort of structure how much time it takes, but we use feedback. So we record feedback from the guys on the ground, and that's really important to us. So how easy is it to implement? How much time does it take? How complex is it to learn? Because these guys are doing their BAU work, right? And they're not Tessian installation professionals or email security professionals. They need a product that's going to work. It's going to sit there. It's going to do its job, and then they can interact with it in a simple and easy way, and then not have to read a long sort of manual and call us all the time, because that starts to get expensive. Because sometimes we have products that we put in, and we walk out the door, we leave them and they're good, and then a week later they're calling us up constantly. So that their consultancy fees go up and stuff like that. So we don't structure it, but we listen to feedback from the guys on the ground, and I think that's really important. So if Tessian isn't doing its job, or it's becoming and it's really important that it doesn't become a sort of ball and chain on the IT department, but becomes something that does work really well. That's when we know we've got success. That then feeds up to the CTOs and the guys that are making decisions and paying the money. We're in the Channel Islands, so it's quite a small environment, so people talk quickly. So Tessian's gained a lot of traction. Some of the traction from that is the way people leaving jobs. And at my last place, Tessian worked really well, or we're going to security conference talking like that. So it's an informal process, to answer it quickly, and but we know when the product isn't working, and we know it pretty quick. And we won't go into a meeting and say this is the product for you, because we have good trust and a good relationship with our clients. So we will only sell a product that we think is going to work, and it does what we want it to do.
Absolutely. And David, on your side, like internally, like do you have any approaches that are repeatable around figuring out how to assess and manage that operational cost overhead on your end?
Yeah, in the case Tessian, what we did was we implemented it out of the box using the Tessian consultants who came in and delivered it reasonably quickly. We then built on that knowledge through the training. So we sent a couple of our security people to the Tessian courses, which was literally a couple of hours online. And then before the end of the week, the sort of 2-week period, they started then looking at some of the data leak protection software pieces and just expanding the system like a Lego brick, really. So we started simple and then we built on it. And what we're now seeing is it's just a continual improvement. So every week we're looking at it, we're seeing what people are doing, what attacks we're getting, and then we're developing slightly using your libraries. We're developing solutions to actually just minimize or monitor how people are using the system across the firm. So from our point of view, it was a very low overhead and didn't cause us anything significant as opposed to other security products.
Got it. Yeah, I think so what I hear from my team, because of course we're using Tessian to protect Tessian as well, as I hope everyone would expect. But one of the things that we have found, especially in a lot of the more recent improvements on the Tessian defend side with investigate and respond and similar, is that uh, and this is anecdotal. I wish I had some magic metric to say, hey, I know exactly how to quantify this right now. But the anecdotal feedback is, wow, with this, like we don't have to change administrative interfaces to go and look something up and switch contextually between different products or systems. And so that's one of the other things that gets me really excited, and not just about like email security, but about security tooling in general, is that the more that operational teams can be empowered to not need to switch between 7 different interfaces, that obviously saves time. It also de-risks things, right? Or worse, needing to go work with 3 other teams because the only way to find what you're looking for may be to run PowerShell on some IT administrator's laptop. I mean, hopefully you're not necessarily doing that on a laptop, but I think you know what I mean. Yeah, that's another aspect that gets me really excited when I see like my team working with tools like Tessian, but also the rest of the security tools that we have in our stack. Okay, great.
People are busy, aren't
So
they?
I
Right?
think,
So
go ahead.
I find that people are really busy. People are really busy. So just if something becomes a problem or if there's obstacles in the way, then maybe it just doesn't get done, or doesn't get as well, or it doesn't get done as well as quickly as it should do. And in
That's
security, you
so
haven't got
true.
time.
And
Or
I think that's the other thing that I think like, and I think maybe in the past like half decade in particular, I think we as like a group of practitioners have gotten a bit better at this, but and also vendors have gotten better at this as well. But like shelfware is still very much a thing in terms of tools that you've bought that you don't actually get value out of because the barrier to accessibility of being able to use it effectively was just too high. And I think that like that's the other hallmark I think of more like high ROI products is when you're able to actually like take an objective look at that and say, did we deploy it? Great. Did we deploy it and use all of the features that we intended and wanted to? And how long did that take us? That's another thing that I think is a really good accountability function to say, hey, is this worth the investment? Are we getting what we expected, especially when you're doing trials?
The other thing to notice is the sheer volume of security alerts. So on an average day, we get hundreds of alerts that we have to process. And the good news about products like Tessian is they actually do a lot of that for us. So the more mundane calls can automatically be dealt with, and then we don't have to deal with everything, which to us is amazing because we then don't have to spend hours trolling through, which in the Tessian world takes minutes.
Yeah, I think that's that's a common appreciated thing, especially on the outbound side. Having the needles in the haystack be found for you and prioritized automatically for further investigation as needed. That's just fantastic compared to like what like my previous teams had to do on the other side of it, which was do proactive hunts and put a whole bunch of effort into those things, use e-discovery tooling even, which may have not been like fit for purpose necessarily for security outcomes, but was the only way to get to the information, again with that higher burden of operator analysis with that as well. All right, so we only have a few minutes left, but I want to make sure that we're able to cover some of these last areas of conversation. What are some like, and we can think more broadly than just email security in terms of like how we're thinking about ROI here, but are there any like key examples or lessons learned that we have as a group in terms of things that we tried that worked or failed miserably in terms of conveying ROI as we're looking at email security or other security products? Let's start there and see how much time we have at the end.
From my perspective, when you start going too granular, so when you start to try and identify all the things that you just can't really realize. So the most common one from a professional services sector is we're going to make a headcount saving or put a product in that's going to make a saving in another department. You generally can't realize that, so you shouldn't even try. The main thing from my point of view is to be realistic about your savings. Identify where you think you can make them, and also if you want to say yes we can do that but it's in a different area, be realistic and say you're probably never going to get that one, because even if you did, there's going to be a reason why you can't later on in the day. So I think from a point of view of ROI, just put the headline totals in, don't go too granular, and just be honest in yourself that says, yes, I'm going to get that one.
Yeah, it's the same sort of thing for us, and we found that not being too obsessed with the numbers has helped, because I think it's very hard to quantify, probably, to be honest with you. And then one of the other things that we found not stressful for an organisation is trialing too many products. So if you're at that point where you're about to try and measure ROI, try and go through the sort of gap analysis properly before trying to put in, like different products at the same time, and then truly understanding the value of each product.
That's such a great call out. No, thank you both, and I think that's a great place for us to start to wrap up. My final confession, because I want to make sure I'm holding myself accountable to the same question, is I did fail, and I got way too granular in terms of trying to go way too deep, as I think both of you mentioned directly and alluded to. One of the things I've leveled up on more recently is starting to articulate this in an outcome basis. What is the frequency of outcomes that our toolings protect against, like account takeover, like endpoint compromise, like, the list goes on, right? So how is actual performance over time compared to our level of investment and the distribution of that investment? And that's been an area of more promising fixation in terms of mapping numbers to outcomes. Okay, and with that, we are at time. Thank you to our audience for joining us. David and Marcus, thank you so much for participating, sharing your experiences and perspectives. And with that, we'll end here. Thanks again, everyone, for attending. Take care.
Thank you so much, Josh, David, and Marcus, for your insights. Our next session covers a hot topic that seems to be everywhere right now. Yes, you guessed it, we're talking about generative AI. This session is titled AI-Powered Deception: How Email Hackers Are Using Generative AI. Attacks are more sophisticated and deceptive than ever before. How are we combating this changing landscape? Our speakers include Daniel Linder, Senior Director of Data Science at Tessian, James Troutman, Senior Account Executive at Guidepoint, and Ram Ganeshanathan, VP of Enterprise Security at Arm. Let's get started.
Hey everyone, welcome to this session. I'm really excited to talk today about AI-powered deception, how email hackers are using generative AI. I'm Daniel Linder. I'm the Senior Director of Data Science at Tessian. So I manage all the teams working on the different algorithms for advanced threat detection. And I'm joined today by Ram and James. Really good to see you guys. Welcome. How's it going?
Thanks, Dan. Doing great.
Yeah, ready to juiced up beginning of the day, got a ton of energy, ready to go?
Absolutely.
You know it.
Nice. Cool. So today, we're talking about generative AI in the email security landscape. And obviously, we all kind of hear the buzz about LLMs, AI. Sometimes people are a bit overhyped and don't even know what's real and what's fake. So, here today, hopefully, we'll be able to talk a little bit and kind of demystify what really is kind of top of mind for some of the people that are really working in the field. One of the things that I've seen a bunch is that it really is a real thing where you really see a ton more emails being generated by large language models. Now, what's kind of interesting is that you're not actually only seeing text-based attacks. You're seeing a lot more audio, video, QR code-based in a ton of different languages. And it really, really is. And I have a different talk that I gave about kind of some of the tactics of how to do it. We'll talk a little bit about those. But I'd be curious to hear either James or Ram, if any one of you want to jump in, about kind of how you've seen any of these things in the actual emails. Have you seen any changes in the way that the emails are looking nowadays?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead,
Ram.
All right.
You guys are too nice.
Too polite. Well, thank you, James. I think we've seen an evolution, definitely, but I think AI is really a buzzword at the moment, and one of the things that we're seeing with cyber threat actors, and actually, if you look back for the last decade, email still remains the number one vector, right? Despite all the evolution in technology, and there's been many, right? AI just seems to be the hype now, and it's a valid one, and that one we need to be concerned about. But actually,
the same things are quite often still very successful. And what we're seeing is certainly that AI is making their effectiveness far greater, but it's not materially changing the way email-based attacks are occurring, right? So from a user perspective, you still want to check who the sender is, you still want to check what the link is and all those type of things. What it really means, however, is that the AI means it can bypass traditional security controls a lot easier. And that means the barrier almost of identification for an end user is that much higher because the quality is that much higher. So languages in terms of the text used within the emails seem far more realistic. The links look far greater. When you click on a link, the website looks like almost near identical replica of the legitimate website and all of those type of things. And actually what we're seeing is that traditional based controls that are maybe more IOC based, so indicators of compromise based, are maybe lagging a little bit in their detection capabilities there. But those that can have actually, ironically, using AI in their detection, actually doing a far greater job at being able to spot the anomaly, right? And that's what a lot of cybersecurity is.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I think I've definitely seen the same thing, which is when you really start looking at the quality of phishing emails. It used to have a ton of the Nigerian prints or a lot of like really bad kind of text-based stuff. And it really is. I mean, sometimes I'll be sitting and looking at emails, and I'm not sure myself, which if it's phishing or not, and you really have to go a little bit deeper, which just kind of shows how advanced they really are becoming. I mean, James, maybe you can talk a little bit about, I know that you do a lot of stuff about educating clients. Is there a way that you kind of talk to them about how this landscape is changing, or tips that you give to them kind of deal with this?
Yeah, absolutely, Dan. So, what I try to, have conversations with my customers, my clients around is moving beyond cyber awareness training, right? Evolving it to more focused on the end user, right? Making it more personalized. Some of the things that we constantly talk about is continuous education and interaction being really the key to developing a strong security culture within the organization. It's really about just involving the users, educating them through some of the organic platforms that you already have, your SharePoint Online. Have something around that people can go to and reference. I think the more that people get involved, the more they understand their part of the culture and even the specific market that they work in. They understand the importance of it, so it's going to encourage them to go look for those bits of information.
Nice. Yeah. No, I think it's definitely, have you seen a lot of the like out of the moment versus in the moment training? I don't know if you've seen any kind of big kind of differences or tips. Do you think that there's a big difference between those two types of training?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that in the moment training, right? We have to enable our users, right? We hear it day in and day out. Security teams are getting either cut by budget, they're getting cut by resources. So we have to, enable our users to be able to identify these things and make decisions on their own, right?
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. And I guess with these kind of the attacks that keep on getting stronger and stronger and stronger, and it really is like you need to have someone at least for the just to stop and think for a second when the email's coming in and like just not trust immediately. I think it's actually sometimes tough with, we all have, I guess maybe I'm just speaking for myself, kind of sometimes a high pressure. Obviously you can see have my little baby over here. This is just one of three. But work, even without kids, can be pretty stressful. And so I think, maybe even Ram, how do you educate people and how do you switch off sometimes on the high pressure security life?
Yeah, sure. And I think this will probably resonate with a lot of the security professionals listening on today's call. One of the things I'm pretty keen is I'm a gym goer. I try and prioritize it kind of first thing in the morning. I diarize it to make sure I get it done, because by the time I get through the end of the day, there's just no chance to be honest, where I've got the energy and the will and the desire to go. But actually, that's not too dissimilar from other people, right? Everyone has their pressures. We're all trying to do a million things. We're all checking out emails all of the time, or Teams or Slack or whatever it may be. And in terms of kind of being more aware and in the moment of kind of the email-based threats when you're always on the go and you've got demands at home or at work and so on and so forth, I try not to engage with emails now. Like when I know I've got a lot going on, I'll scan it and I'll just mark it as unread, and I'll go back to it and respond and engage when I know I have the time. But I still feel like if there's a burning, fire, I've got eyes on it. Although by now everyone knows not to email me. If it's a burning fire, you should not be emailing me. You should absolutely be texting or calling me. We're kind of developing things like that I mean, and that's what works for me. But for different colleagues, they have different things. And one of the things I was actually speaking to a colleague about earlier last week was using email delays, right? Giving yourself that extra 60 seconds. That's the time delay of when you press send to actually when it goes out. So when I've got that, I made a typo. Actually, I sent it to the wrong person. Or I want to change. There's small things that we can do just to give ourselves a little bit more breathing space.
Nice. I like that. Yeah, and I think that will protect you both from inbound phishing attacks, but it'll also protect you from misdirected email sending to the wrong James. So I think that's definitely a good tip that I probably don't do enough. So thanks for that one. Yeah, and in terms of, like the way that we see some of these attacks going, and the way that the kind of like with chat, have any of you guys used ChatGPT before?
Yes.
Yeah, I've used
you use
it.
them for any type of email security stuff, or just more for personal use?
From my perspective, I mean, some personal use. Sorry, Ram. Some personal use, and then just kind of tidying up some kind of some additional learning. Around what the attackers are actually leveraging to craft some of these emails.
Yeah, nice. I mean, I think, and have you guys used any of the other open source type of things like Llama or any of those type of coding stuff? Any of the non kind of ChatGPT type of large language models? I'm guessing the answer is no.
Enterprise scale. No, not on an enterprise scale. I think there's a lot of
and I think that's kind of interesting.
Sorry,
I think that's kind of interesting because I'm guessing that's similar to most people, which is a lot of people are very familiar with like the ChatGPTs, but they're not as familiar with some of the more code-based stuff that maybe some of the llamas or the falcons or whatever, those type of different models that are more open source. So it's just, we can just see a little bit that the barrier of entry to someone that doesn't really code is still not completely broken. Although I do think that learning how to do prompt engineering specifically for people that aren't coders themselves can be really, really useful. So this is for anyone watching as well, that I think that the barrier of entry right now for some of the open source stuff is still a bit high. But for the kind of ones about the large language models that you can actually chat with, I think that learning prompt engineering can really actually have a really big improvement on what you do during the day. So that's just one of those things that you'll see also, is that not anyone can use some of these large language models to defend themselves, which is why if you're going to be building an email security system, which I think Rami alluded to a little bit earlier, about that you can't just do an old school rule-based system. If you're going to be building a much more advanced one, you're probably going to need people that really know how to use these things in a more advanced way. It just talks a little bit about the personnel that you need for some of these things. Maybe, James, a question for you. Are there any specific pain points of like any of the clients that are asking for? Is there anything specific that you find popping up over and over and over?
Yeah, I think, from what I hear across my client base is, there's an increasing concern, when it comes to AI, right? It comes to, understanding the different range of threats, including, the fish, just the standard phishing emails, the deep fake content, advanced social engineering. Those are things people are trying to get their hands wrapped around, right? From a pain point perspective, I think, people are still trying to get a really good understanding of how can they be better at detecting and identifying these threats. These phishing attacks, they're getting more advanced, right? So again, what kind of technology do I have in place today that can help me identify these advanced phishing attacks? And I mentioned it before, user training and awareness. How do I keep my, beyond SAT, how do I keep my users, up to speed with, common things? I think it's really important, as we evolve our security awareness training. I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, but I think it's really, really important for organizations to even, build a cyber champions program, right? Keep people involved, reward people for making good decisions, bringing stuff to the team's attention. Those are things that go a long way. And even maybe on a quarterly basis, sitting down and talking about the threats that we saw over the last 3 months and kind of helping to understand what those threats are and how they have impact to our to their specific business model, right? I think it goes a long way just, continuing to educate people and understand why is it important for me to play a role as part of this, cyber culture.
Yeah, I like that. Cybersecurity champions. Is that you're talking about people that aren't on the actual security team, but just overall within the company? Or you're talking about specifically people on the security team?
No, the Cyber Champions program can expand, beyond the the cybersecurity team, and hopefully it would, right? Where you have these, advocates, basically building a cyber army within inside the organization, to where you've got people out there always constantly looking, constantly reporting. I'm a huge fan of, trust but verify and verify again. So, if people start asking the question, it educates everyone and gets everybody, thinking the same way and on the same lines.
Yeah, I think it's good. Like the idea, I think you'll see with a lot of companies, a lot of tech companies, they'll have like front end guild or a back end guild and an infrastructure guild, but I don't think you see as many kind of cybersecurity guilds. And I think that's actually an interesting thing to just kind of bring it into the core part and be kind of champions from within. I think that is a really interesting idea. Maybe Ram, I don't know if do you have any examples of certain things that you would consider to be like really specific but advanced attacks that you've seen kind of stopped in recent times?
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the things certainly I know the industry is seeing more recently is kind of QR scan email-based threats. And so for your listeners who may not be familiar with what this threat looks like, it's essentially like a standard email. Instead of a normal text-based link, it's got a QR code, which you then scan using a mobile. And that's great actually from a threat actor perspective, right? Because we've got all of these wonderful security tools on your endpoint and your laptop. But actually, what you're trying to get the end user to do now is scan those QR codes. It looks pretty innovative. It looks quite engaging. Humans are curious, and you scan it, but you probably scan it using your work phone or your personal phone. And your work phone and personal phone doesn't have firewalls. It doesn't have, well, in most cases, doesn't anyway. It doesn't have your antivirus and all the rest of it. And if you do, hats off to you because you are one of the most secure people I know, or security aware people I know. And actually, this is one of those things where actually you can't still use a traditional based detection methodology because actually these new techniques, now we were alluding to it earlier, right, about the use of AI. Well, actually now with that and running a script, you can hammer, hundreds of thousands of people in the space of a few minutes. So it's just really a numbers game. And actually giving them the ability. I know Tessian's recently launched this kind of detection capability in QR codes, but that's something that I've definitely seen a step change where I saw it once or twice a few years ago, but now I know across the industry we're seeing it in volumes they're far larger. And I'm speaking to other organizations, other vendors, and it's something that I know they're seeing increasingly more and more. And the other thing
Yeah.
I'm seeing is really more targeted and specific. Now, if we go back to that same point around how easy it is, it's not that expensive to actually launch, an email phishing campaign, right? You've got a data breach; it's pretty free. They're available on the internet. You run a script, and it just kind of goes for low value. And now with the use of AI, all the websites look far more slicker. You go to ChatGPT, you get your English or whatever chosen language absolutely perfect, even if it's not your first language. The barrier to compromise for a threat actor is just so low. I mean, I'm not proud of saying this, but it's never been a better time to be a threat actor if you're so inclined, right?
It's a bit too easy, huh? Yeah, no, I think it's definitely true. I think it's a good point where the barrier of entry is just a bit too low. That if you're running an old, like in a regular kind of rule-based system, you're really in trouble with how easy it is nowadays for, I mean, it's easier than really ever before in so many different mediums. Like you said about QR codes, right? We had this past week we had a whole bunch of things on Azure, Zoom, Outlook, all QR code based with spoof display names, and you just see it in thousands and thousands and thousands. And that's only one of them, right? You see all these other different types of hacks which are using voice, right? I can clone someone's voice. I can clone Ram or James' voice. I can clone your voice and call up your boss and be like, hey, can you just open up this thing? I just sent it to you. I mean, that's really scary. The amount of things that we're going to be able to trust. I mean, this is probably a bigger topic about what we can trust anymore, but it's really becoming this place where I think our reliance on machines is in some ways scary about like, I think in certain cases, and I think you'll see it also in like data science challenges, that some cases machines are just better than humans at detecting certain things, even handwritten digits or something like that, which is a bit kind of scary about what what's going on nowadays. But yeah, I mean, I think maybe do you find any importance to trying to keep, like, how do you keep the education or like the keeping up with like being on your toes at all times? How do you keep that fun and engaging? Because I think that in many cases, some of these things can be a bit like, ooh, cybersecurity awareness training and stuff like that. Do you have any tips for how to keep that kind of like lively and fun? Even though that seems to be like different directions to talk about these things.
Yeah, I think it's about proportionality, right? I mean, we're security professionals, but honestly, security is not the most exciting thing that everyone wants to hear about. So you need to tailor to your audience and be proportionate. So actually, we take more of a risk-based methodology, right? Depending on your security hygiene and your high-risk behaviors. So this is just a fictitious example, but if you're clicked on 4 out of the last 4 phishing simulation tests, and you've got another person who never has, is it right that they both need to go through the exact same training process and need to be educated? Because actually then the message is lost. In fact, you probably lose credibility if you tell somebody demonstrating all the behaviors, there's no evidence of them demonstrating poor behaviors or needing education. If you keep hammering them, they cause resentment, right? It just gets annoying. Versus the person, right, who maybe clicked on it once, or you give them the training or whatever your bespoke thing is for your company. Well, they do it a second time, then you need to take a bit of responsibility as an organization or as a security team, right? Whatever communication you are using or training methodology is not working for this individual. So how do you tailor it? Now, some people can do an online course and it's great for them, right? They know what they're doing. Others probably want to have a face-to-face conversation with just a one-on-one individual. And you might, your listeners may say that's not scalable, but actually, if you do take that risk-based tiering approach, the ones that you will deliver the greatest, return on investment, quote unquote, from a security risk perspective, are the ones that demonstrate the highest risk. It's probably 1%, right? 0.5% of the people are the population you're trying to address. The rest can probably get along with the more generic, more scalable training solution. So I really think, much like what we do, taking the risk-based methodology and then seeing what fits for that audience is really the best way forward.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. Like the idea about flipping the pyramid. I actually heard a talk recently about specifically also for vulnerabilities, which is kind of the idea of like having full coverage on all of your employees is not necessarily the way to go. It's more like focusing on the ones that most likely could do the most damage. Like getting hit with a phishing email doesn't mean the same thing if they're asking for a $10 Apple gift card or if they're talking to the CFO asking for $1 million payment. And so I think the idea of doing this for more vulnerable users, the people that aren't as educated about it in a way that suits for them, even if it only is a small percentage, probably will protect the company more than having a blanket kind of coverage for that. I like that idea. James, do you have any thoughts on that? Or
No, I think both of you was spot on, right? It kind of goes back to, are you gonna, if you've got users that don't have the same level of access, right, that are working in very single applications, file shares, right, their impact on a phishing email is not going to be as great, right? If you've got the other protections, around those those specific areas.
yeah.
I mean, one of the things I'll mention this. One of the things that I've worked with a few of my clients here recently, that are starting to adopt these, cyber champion programs that are doing quarterly. I'm going to present to you what we've seen over the last 3 months. Again, how it pertains to our specific industry, is get people engaged, right? Cyber bingo, right? There you can literally go out and build cards, online, right? You can either subscribe to a service, you can build them at no cost. Take words out of the presentation, right? And then have people fill those in just like they're playing a regular bingo game, and give them a reward at the end. It goes a long way, and people actually pay attention because they want to make sure that they bingo.
Nice. Very, very cool. Yeah, I mean, I think we're running up a little bit on time. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about or mention before we head off? No? Then I guess I put into ChatGPT right before this talk I asked it to write an email security joke. There are two good ones. One is, why did the email go to therapy? Because it had too many attachments and couldn't express itself properly. I kind of like that one. The second one was write another one, which is, why was the computer cold? Because it left its windows open. There you go. Not so good, not so bad. I'm a dad. You got to go with some of them. So thank you very much, James. Thank you very much, Ram. It's been fun. Thank you very much, Mala. Guess you can't see her right now, but it's been fun. Thank you very, very much for educating me and hopefully educating the people watching. And back to you.
Thank you, Dan, James, Ram. Dan, thanks for lightening up a heavy topic with a few AI-generated jokes. The perfect way to wrap up a session. All right, this event has been flying by. It's time for our final keynote of the day. So far, you've heard several themes around advanced phishing detection, insider risk, but what does that mean for the future of email security? How are we continuing to evolve to stay one step ahead of attackers? To weigh in on what lies ahead for this industry, we have Alan Lieberman, Chief Product Officer at Tessian, and Ash Hunt, Global CISO of Apex Group. Let's dive in.
Okay, great. Thank you. Welcome everybody to Innovations in Email Security. It's great to have everybody part of this as our capstone for forward thinking. Really excited to be joined by Ash Hunt, so we could get some perspective here on what's happening and the transitions in the email security landscape. So Ash, welcome. Thank you very much for joining.
Pleasure. Great to be here. Good to speak with you, Alan.
Yeah, great. So maybe we should start sort of with a real top-down look at this market. When you think about email security, can you talk through the risk in terms of what you see, and is this a problem really worth solving?
So to your last point, absolutely. It's probably something that I deal with day in, day out, as I imagine most security professionals and decision makers do. In fact, probably most technology professionals do. When I think of the amount of work I do with my CTO, so much of it revolves around email. It's something that we can't seem to get away from. And particularly for our business, we're one of the world's largest fund administrators and alternative asset organizations. So much of what we do, and at least in terms of our operations, transactions, etc., are conducted via email today. Now, while that may not be the optimum architecture, it's one we have to live with for the time being. And so it's incumbent upon me to address this sort of front on. It's interesting when I look at the market, because I think a lot of the backdrop to email security is a heavy focus on adversarial attacks. So inbound attacks to user inboxes, obviously seeking to compromise accounts, etc., and exfiltrate data, which is definitely one part of it. And our threat landscape's constantly metastasizing and growing in different directions. So that's really important. But actually, a lot of what I deal with on a day-to-day basis typically happens from a kind of DLP angle of inadvertent data disclosure. So internal people either making errors or indeed insider threats, where they might be sending the wrong data to the wrong person. Okay, and it's obviously typically PII or very sensitive financial data. And so I think this has been an interesting area, particularly as I've looked at the growth of email security solutions over time, and where I think Tessian's been very successful in addressing, is looking at all event management around email and trying to capture that telemetry and provide not only automated response actions, but to enable decision makers like me to look at all of the things that are causing my loss exposure and not just some single sort of adversarial-led scenarios across email. So I think that's been probably the most interesting step change that I've seen in email security going forward. And obviously, the advent of more effective machine learning-based techniques embedded in these tools are only going to make those capabilities better going forward.
Yeah, I think that's a great approach in terms of looking at the challenge that we have in front of us and how we can help enable defenders over time, in terms of really sort of looking at the different segments and classes of risk as they're applied to the organization. External, as you talked about, internal, and then making sure that operationally the tools all are working together and that we're doing as much as we can to go ahead and enable the SOC going forwards. And in addition, we can pull in the end users and how they're thinking about and what we need them to evolve towards to help with this challenge. So maybe we'll break down the framework like that. Can you talk about what you're seeing in terms of maybe external threats first? What are you seeing the evolution in terms of threats as they're coming into you, and how you're addressing them?
When I look at my loss event frequency, so I look at all the event types that come in and I start racking up how many are occurring of which type, it's still true that there's a lot of low hanging fruit that's gone after by attackers. And I don't think, as you've seen, attacks that can be more advanced necessarily rid organizations of very unsophisticated attacks that are still quite successful. It's a kind of, I guess, balance on the part of the attackers, whereby depending on your estate's architecture, there could still be really easy attack vectors and points of entry, and email is obviously a typical use case for that. And battling that can just still be the reality for what you're dealing with a lot of the time. But it's been interesting. We're a private organization, but we've got a very public presence, and particularly when I compare it to other public organizations that I've worked in the past, what I have seen now is an unprecedented level of sophistication on some emails, particularly crafted. I mean, what I kind of call the next stage of spear phishing, but a kind of level of sort of inference on tone, language, spelling, phraseology, in ways which, given the pace of operations in our business, our senior stakeholders are unlikely to be able to counter, no matter how much behavior change and training that we embed throughout the organization, which is why we focus on developing our security products and tools and configuring them in our environments so that human beings can fail. But that is where we try and focus on our operational effectiveness of our control suite. So we're seeing particularly some of those emails and very much targeted at specific stakeholders in our business, and this is also coupled with things like domain spoofing as well. So we're seeing very kind of profile-based led attacks on key individuals within the business, coupled with that then low-hanging fruit for attackers, and that's become quite a potent combination to deal with from a risk perspective.
Yeah, I think we see a lot of that as well. And our approach has really been a layered approach to really help with the most sophisticated attacks, that solid AI-based defense framework, in addition to all the things that can help take out a lot of the noise and a lot of those attacks that really should be easier to detect and solve, but basically having a single unified solution to go ahead and help on all those inbound threats. Earlier, you talked about the insider risk that's posed, intentional or accidental. Can you talk about what you're seeing there in terms of the evolution of the threats that you're seeing over email that are posed by insiders, and how you're thinking about it and actually addressing those?
So they don't typically happen in isolation. So if I think about adversarial led but insider threats, it typically is coupled with instances of disgruntlement, maybe perceived unfair dismissal, and then therefore ineffective access revocation controls, and then us not being able to get quick enough to detect exfiltration via email, particularly if it's being done in a particular sort of choreographed way, which we're going to find more challenging to detect, and that's why we obviously look at capabilities like Tessian to help capture those kind of movements and activity in as close to real time as possible. But actually, what is, I think, perceived as the mundane and what I call high frequency, low temp, sort of low signature loss is actually a lot of the time it's people making error. It could be we have, for example, we're in M&A, so we have lots of domains across our internal business, but we also have very infused relationships with some of our clients and investors who are used to being on things like distribution lists, etc., joint internal and external distribution lists. And sometimes when I look again, the loss event frequency, it's instances where people are with good intent, but unfortunately sending the wrong data to the wrong person. and it's surprising how quickly those can expand out into very serious incidents very quickly that can incur a lot of loss for us as a business. And so one of the advantages that we found with particularly Tessian is being able to consolidate all of that focus, not just on one threat profile, but on multiple, and have it work in lockstep in one single platform, which obviously has a lot of ROI in terms of, from an operations standpoint, of my Global Security Operations Center and other teams that are going to be leveraging Tessian. And on the reverse side of that, it's probably worth just briefly mentioning, because I think it's an important point. Tessian's one of the few tools which has a lot of, I would say, end user familiarity. So we work with a lot of people, ordinary users across the business, on calibrating and crafting Tessian so that it works in a very subtle but highly effective manner for the business. So it's not impeding those workflows, but it's going to pick up all of the, as like that kind of net that catches all of any potential errors that are made, and of course always be there if there are any intent-based attacks as well. So that's the sort of things that we're seeing, and we're sort of dealing with on a daily basis.
That makes a lot of sense. What we're hearing a lot from the community is the pace of work. It's really, really quick. Folks are really trying to get their jobs done. And as they move quickly, they have a tendency to make mistakes. And so making sure that you have a capability basically looking over their shoulder and helping them make good decisions about accomplishing their roles can be really, really helpful. As you said, it reduces your risk and it really protects them. You started to lean into there a little bit, what's happening within the security operations team and how to become much more effective. I imagine, like everybody else, there are significant resource constraints, even for an organization as large as yours. Can you talk about how the landscape's evolving inside the Security Operations Center and the capabilities that you require for an email security tool over time?
For sure. So I've spoken about it before, particularly with other vendors across my stack, but I go for this approach of security orchestration. So I want not necessarily a consolidated, but certainly a very refined suite of technologies that work in conjunction with one another, and for my delivering automation for my analysts and not the other way around. We kind of have a principle of automation by default in information security within Apex, and part of that then is having technologies that can help deliver as much autonomous action as possible. And Tessian's a great example where we using kind of things like security orchestration, automated response actions, tying into use cases in our SIEM platform, that we can deliver automated remediation actions and corrective actions, even from things like raising tickets, right through to instant investigation and response. And that's been a key capability that we've seen growing out of Tessian. That's got massive application in terms of also reducing our risk, because when I look at measuring response loss, that's a key part of the amount of time, energy, and effort my security operations center have to spend conducting root cause analysis and forensics, etc. It's invariably a lot of the time via email, even if I'm dealing with something like maybe a subject access request, right through to a malicious incident. Having that ability to quickly cut across vast swathes of data on our email estate and get to concise empirical answers quickly is an amazing capability that I definitely didn't have a few years ago. It takes a while to really, I think, establish it well, but I think one of the handrails that we found effective has been focusing on what are the key use cases and loss scenarios that we really care about as a business. What are the things that are happening most often, causing the most amount of loss? So not only has Tessian helped give us that telemetry to support those use cases, but its technical capabilities have enabled it to fuse in with my SIEM platform, the rest of my other DLP technologies, and really providing a whole suite of protective capability, detective capability, and corrective capability in a single platform, which has been game changing for looking at the operational efficiencies of my SOC, and has also finally helped actually inform the future operating model of the SOC, whereby we can actually operate it with less people and more autonomy through our technology, which is exactly what we want to achieve.
Yeah, it's great. We've been really, really focused on the path of automation, orchestration, and enabling the team that when you do have a human pivot into the tool, they really have access to the information as fast as possible, right at their fingertips, so that they can perform a very, very quick response with all the data required to go ahead and understand the entire scope of an incident and then be able to respond to it as fast as possible. We believe that this is absolutely key here in the future of email security. Another area that we've touched upon just a little bit, but I'm curious if you have maybe a few more thoughts around the role that end users play and how organizations can and should think about evolving their role in email security over time.
Absolutely. So particularly coming, as I mentioned, from an estate where we do a lot of merger and acquisition, and we have a sort of archipelago at the moment of small technical estates across our business. One of the things at the forefront of my mind is not to hinder any further operational effectiveness of our kind of client service ops or any of our frontline operations as a business, and to try actually to enable them. And that's really how I see all of my security products. And email, because of so much of our operations and transactions are conducted via email, has the potential to be one of those capabilities which could go one way or the other. And so we made a very concerted effort to, when we're deploying Tessian, to really work with our country heads, their local teams, on understanding how email is used on a day-to-day basis in those areas of the business. We sort of cut and slice this in various different ways. So we looked at particular key business functions, for example. We looked at the process architecture in those functions, key stakeholders, both internal and external to the organization as well. And what that helped us to do was really lock in things that were going to go wrong, and most often, and things whereby we were happy to take a more or a less risk adverse position. So we found Architect to be really valuable in that case. There were certain jurisdictions that we have globally where we actually had sort of end users and team leads come to us proactively, knowing we were going to deploy Tessian, to say, this is a constant problem for us. I see it happen all the time. Someone's put the wrong data into the wrong file and it's gone to the wrong destination, whatever it might be. Or we typically get these kinds of data points in, but we also get a lot of emails kind of mimicking that, which are obviously of ill intent. What can you do to assist us, right? And that data give us, coupled with architecture as a capability, the ability to go after developing very specific use cases for particular teams that we didn't have to apply to the whole organization, and we could set very local policy and specific corrective actions as a result. And so Tessian very quickly became perceived as one of the capabilities in the business, not to just secure and burn down material risk, but technically it was an investment of capital in a tool that is enabling the business to operate more effectively, because it's not going to be spending time having to explain to clients why we've had these particular incidents. So it's helped us get into removing security, the perception of security in the business as a cost center, and instead a revenue generator for the business. And that's something that I'm hoping I can take not only just from the email space, but actually apply across the whole of our security stack.
Yeah, it's an amazing turn when you can go ahead and pivot how people think about the security program to really revenue enabling. It's a really significant cultural transition there. And I think it's really interesting how you talked about really applying almost a bespoke model into each of the different business units that you're supporting, all the way down to the people who are going ahead and interacting with the systems over time, to really provide a real tight security control, but also one that doesn't negatively impact the business.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think flexibility is Sorry, I was just going to say, I think flexibility would be the last point I would make as well, being key on our security controls. So there are times where we've encountered with other technologies to be quite restricted and constrained about once we've deployed and configured a capability, well, that's kind of how it has to stay, and that's the exploit of its limitation. Whereas with Tessian, we found that we can apply those policies for certain periods of time, and sort of increase the threshold of applicability and decrease it based on the movements of the business. And that's also been a really key value add, particularly in terms of the return on investment of Tessian as a platform in the business.
Yeah, that's great. As we wind down here on time, Ash, is there anything else that you could talk through in terms of the future of email security, sort of where you see things going here over time? Anything else in terms of what the audience should be thinking about as they think about where we go in a year or two or three around protecting enterprises in this really critical security vector?
So I think really the key thing is focusing on loss and where it happens. So I think a lot of the time people focus on the sort of fine or the sort of maybe static cost of a data breach. But actually, if you're looking at breaches that typically occur via email, you need to be measuring all of the time to investigate, time to respond, all of the hours that have gone in of your staff to deal with that. And also maybe all of the other areas that data might be being exfiltrated that you don't know about. So getting your email solution talking to the rest of your estate is absolutely critical. And if you go after that, you'll start being much more transparent about where you're actually losing money and where your investment initiatives can go after. And that's been, again, one of the ways we've been able to sell the sort of return on investment to the business, not only of Tessian, but other products, because we really look at all of the things that it's actually benefiting, and maybe not just the sort of high level key use cases, because there's so much potential of the platform and the capability. And that's something that the business is continually leveraging. And it's, again, having pervasive effect, not only just across the technology stack, but process and people in the rest of the business as well, which is transformative for security.
Yeah, I love it. I love that complete approach to email security with a risk-based lens. And of course, applying the latest capabilities to protect against inbound threats, outbound threats, to enable the SOC and to enable end users while letting the business go ahead and be that revenue generating entity that it's intending to be. Ash, I can't thank you enough. I thought this was really, really great. Your perspective was really helpful, and I really appreciate that. So thanks, everybody, for attending Forward Thinking. I'll pass it back. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan and Ash. A very interesting session for our audience. And thank you to the rest of our speakers today for sharing your stories and insights with us. If you missed this live, the entire programme will be available to watch again on our LinkedIn and at tessian.com/webinars. Feel free to pass it along to a colleague or continue the conversation in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. We've covered a lot, but here are a few final key takeaways from the Tessian team. Firstly, layers are everything. You've heard from Jules Corbin that they're good in a cake, but even better in your email security to catch the threats that are getting past your SEG or cloud email provider. Secondly, Tessian can help you maximize your Microsoft investment. Jason and Bob talked about the time burden on security teams having to respond to phishing attacks that were reaching inboxes. Instead, Microsoft and Tessian are better together, layering AI-based phishing detection that uses machine learning and behavioral intelligence to catch even the most advanced threats. And finally, partner with a security vendor that takes a complete approach to email security. You heard from Alan and Ash on what lies ahead, whether it's a sophisticated QR code phishing attack or an outbound email typo that leads to accidental data loss. You need a security solution that protects against emergent threats, but also enables security teams to respond faster and coaches your end users in the moment to make good decisions when they're moving fast. On behalf of everyone at Tessian, I want to thank you so much for joining Forward Thinking Virtual Summit. Our audience helps us push these conversations forward, and I hope that you all taken something away from the session today. Before we end, this event wouldn't be possible without our integrated marketing and production teams, our speakers, and our partners. Thank you.